St. Ignatius of Loyola was a Spanish saint who lived from 1491 to 1556. At the age of 17, he joined the army, mostly because he desired to become famous like the men in the stories he would read about in his teenage years. He could be found strutting around town, mostly just showing off his sword and his dagger under his military uniform in his youthfulness. Eventually, he was called upon for military service and quickly rose in the ranks because of his diplomacy and leadership abilities. During one such military campaign, he was severely injured by a cannonball that ricocheted off of a nearby wall and hit his leg. It required a tremendous amount of medical attention, many surgeries that required breaking and resetting of the bones, even without any anesthetic. Ultimately, it left him with permanent injuries so that he could never return to the military. While convalescing in the hospital run by the local convent, he began to read the books that the sisters had. They didn't have the books that he desired, the ones of all of the military conquests and all the books that he read about fame and glory in his teenage years. He had to read the books, the religious books that they had on hand, the lives of the saints, scriptures, or the life of Christ. But he would find himself daydreaming about his military campaigns and daydreaming about the books that he was reading when he was a teenager. And as he daydreamed about these things and thought about these things, he realized that when he would quit thinking about them, they left him depressed, they left him feeling empty, and they left him desolate. But when he continued to think about, even after putting the books down, about the lives of the saints or the life of Christ, and meditating upon these things, he began to find that he was left full and consoled. And he was filled with tremendous joy and excitement. And as he began to take note of these feelings, he began to kind of mentally compile a file in his mind about what was happening during all of these things. And so eventually, his heart was converted. Although he was baptized as a child, he never lived his baptismal call. He only lived for himself. He lived for the fame, the glory, and the pleasures that came with the life of wearing the uniform of a military officer. With his conversion and the noticing of what was going on within him as he meditated upon the lives of the saints and the life of Christ, he began to develop what we call today the spiritual exercises. These spiritual exercises followed his experience in the military, coupled with his reading of the lives of the saints and Christ, for people to meditate on and to experience a conversion in their life as well. In the midst of these spiritual exercises, he began to acknowledge this discernment of spirits that came along with these spiritual exercises. This discernment of spirits and these spiritual exercises were to help one to advance in the spiritual life. Today, his legacy has left what we call the long retreat, or more often known as a 30-day retreat, which then is shortened to an 8-day retreat as well. During this retreat, a soul enters into the exercises in order to gain a deeper union with Christ for love of his kingdom. Each day, he offers a meditation or a scene or a scenario upon which one meditates. And when they meditate, and when a soul meditates upon these exercises or meditates upon these scenes, they discern within them what is happening. What are our feelings? What is the Lord putting upon our mind? What is our heart doing in order to be able to go into ourselves, to recognize our faults, and to allow us to see where Christ is working in our lives? On what is called the 4th day of the retreat, he offers a meditation called the Two Standards. The meditation is to consider the two standards or the two camps. One of Christ in Jerusalem and one of Satan in Babylon. St. Ignatius was very aware of that constant battle that is being waged between God, who created us with dignity, and the forces of evil, which look to pervert that dignity to selfish ends. Human beings either praise, reverence, and serve God, thus becoming who they are created to be, or they follow a lie and begin to break themselves down in the core of their being. So in this meditation, we imagine these opposed paths of life as two armies encamped against each other, the one led by Christ and the other by Satan, the prince of lies. The grace we are seeking is first a knowledge of Satan's ways so that we can guard against them, and a second, a knowledge of Christ's ways so that we can more easily follow his path. Each army has its own tactics, which St. Ignatius describes in tremendous detail. Imagining Satan sending his minions from Babylon throughout the world in order to ruin lives. But he doesn't threaten people with physical force or ruin. No, he first entices them with riches, this love of riches. This love of riches which leads to a fear of poverty, and further to a station of love of honors. And once honors are loved, it is only a short step to the overwhelming pride that is a true mark of a soul separated from God. For it is the prideful soul that most readily follows the maxim non serviam, which means I will not serve. Christ, however, sends his apostles and disciples throughout the world from a lowly place on the plains near Jerusalem. And contrary to all worldly expectations, he does not seek to obtain followers through attractive signing bonuses. The ordeals he went through at the beginning of his life bear witness to this. He simply, the word is not chosen lightly, exhorts his followers to spiritual poverty, which is total reliance upon the Father in all matters, and even then to actual poverty, if God so chooses. And if poverty isn't enough to jar comfortable souls, he even encourages them to accept insults and contempt from the world. St. Ignatius believes if we are detached from the world's approval, we will more easily obtain the true root of all virtues, which is humility. And if we possess humility, the kingdom is ours. Every virtue flows easily into the soul, which possesses humility. Poverty, contempt, humility. These marks of the standard of Christ are only possible for a human to bear if there is a God above who is completely loving and trustworthy. The good news of the gospel proclaims that, yes, in fact, this God lives and has revealed himself in Christ. And so shall we not follow his banner, the banner of Christ? An early church document called the Didache begins, there are two ways, one of life and one of death, but a great difference between the two ways. The way of life is the standard of Christ in which we choose life. The way of death is with Satan, and there is no middle ground. The gospel today speaks of this way of life. We know we are on the way of life by the fruit that is produced. saying that we can't just say that we believe, or we can't just say that we have faith. There have to be actions that follow. Even the devil believes in God. Even the devil has faith, knows that God exists, knows that Christ has come. The action that is necessary from our faith in Christ requires being a disciple, one who recognizes their sonship in the Father and lives it out as Christ has lived it out. We will never, as a disciple, be greater than the master, greater than the teacher, but we are united to him as sons and daughters, and we will receive the same reward that our teacher has received, life in heaven with God. Lent begins on Wednesday. The 40 days of Lent are for us to interiorly or go inside to our heart and to recognize those places in our heart that are not in the camp of Christ. To recognize those places in our life that we are still in the camp of Satan, where we still love riches, we still love the things of the world, we still love all of that which is contrary to the gospel. The practices of Lent, of prayer, fasting, and almsgiving are direct attacks on those areas of our life that we have not given over to Christ. Lent requires a decision on our part to choose the standard of Christ or the opposite, which is the standard of Satan and the devil. Everything that we do matters. Every word, thought, and action reflects on whether we are in the camp of Christ or if we are in the camp of the devil. There are only two ways: the way of Christ or the way of Satan. The way of Christ is life forever with God. Lent is a season that we recognize that we desire Christ, and we live in a way in which we are a disciple of Christ, to follow him closely, to put on Christ, and to imitate him in all that we do, to seek heaven above all things, that which Christ has called us to.